let's talk about the Caro-Kann defense. Alright, so it starts with e4, and now you will play c6. After d4, controlling the center, black should respond with d5, striking the center. Now white has three choices: to push, take, or to defend this pawn by playing pawn to f3 or knight to f3. I'm going to only discuss about pawn to e5 and pawn takes d5, and hopefully you guys learn. Anyway, after pawn to e5, the main plan is to attack this pawn on d4. But for now, we're going to play bishop f5. Some grandmasters play pawn to c5, attacking it like that way, because after pawn takes c5, you would play knight to c6 or pawn to e6. But anyway, bishop to f5. So just remember these two things, alright? If bishop to d3, just simply take and then play pawn to e6 so that you can be able to play c5 and attack this d4 square. That's our main line. That's our main plan. Let's say, for example, knight f3, c5. The pawn cannot take because the bishop can take. Oh wait, by the way, if he actually takes and bishop takes c5, if he plays queen to b5 check, don't worry, because there's actually still knight to d7 defending. And after queen takes b7, there is now knight to e7 knight to e7, and guess what? The queen just actually wastes her time by picking up pawns, and we already finished our development. But anyway, let's come back to the position. If pawn to h4, our main moves are playing pawn to e6 and c5 to challenge the center on d4. But if you play it immediately, you would get hit by white playing pawn to g4. So the bishop has only two squares to go, e4 and g6. But no matter where it goes, it will be chased by playing pawn to f4, bishop g6, and pawn to h5. Or bishop to g6, pawn h5, bishop e4, pawn f3, and the bishop is going to get trapped either way. Let's come back to the position. So, in order to prevent g4, h4, h5, which prevents to play g4, and again, we would just simply continue our plan by playing pawn to e6 and pawn to c5. Now, let's say instead of playing either of these two amateur moves, white should either develop this f3 knight, the king's knight, or the queen's knight. Let's say knight f3. Now you would continue your plan by playing pawn to e6, and then playing pawn to c5. So bishop e2. Let's say, for example, pawn to c5. Let's say castles. Knight to c6, putting a lot of pressure onto the d4 square. If white continues with bishop e3 defending this pawn, you would start the exchange by playing pawn takes c4. You should think of ways that to exchange at the right moment. Let's say knight takes. Now white begins a trap by playing knight takes d4. Okay, why is this a trap though? Because in the Caro-Kann, you should always be aware of this diagonal right over here. It's quite weakened because there's no c pawn. And once you would have taken this pawn on e5, guess what? There's now bishop to b5 check. The knight cannot go to c6 because if he goes there, the knight will just simply take, and after b takes, bishop takes c6 check, attacking the king and the rook, and black is losing. So instead black plays knight to d7, but After knight takes f5, e takes f5. Now it's an advantage for white, even though black has won a pawn, because there would be queen takes d5. So instead of taking this pawn on e5, what you can do is to play knight takes d4. If either bishop takes or queen takes, it doesn't really matter, because you would have this plan after you took this pawn on d4. Let's say, for example, queen takes d4, since it's the best move. Now after knight to e7, we are now planning to play knight to c6 and attacking and putting pressure on the queen and this pawn. Let's say he plays queen to a4 check. Now continue your plan by playing knight to c6, and this pawn is being under attack. If I place rook to d1, queen to c7, just continue pressuring this pawn right over here. You want just be patient and just continue putting pressure. If we notice that this knight is pinned, right? So it cannot take. So queen to c7. But let's say bishop takes d4 is his choice. Now knight to e7, prepares knight to c6, and attack and putting pressure on the d4 and e5. And after this, we would continue by playing bishop e7 and the castle the king. Let's say now after this, white challenge center by playing pawn to c4, d takes c4, bishop takes c4, and then now you would continue your plan by playing knight to c6, attacking this bishop. The bishop tries to pin the knight by playing bishop to b5, but then you would play bishop e7, and now we can now castle our king and have a good position. Let's come back to the position from earlier. Alright, so we have already discussed e5, but what about pawn takes d5? Now you would respond by c takes d5, and our game plan is to simply play knight to develop our knights, play bishop to g4, or f5, and just simply play e6 and bishop to d6. Okay, let's go. Let's say bishop knight to f3, knight f6, knight f3, knight f6, bishop pins, you play bishop to g4, and castles, pawn to e6, bishop to g5, and then bishop d6, and have a good position. Okay, so after, let's say another move, pawn to c4, which is the pan of attack. There's now knight to f6, and supporting this pawn on d5. If he takes, knight takes, and white would have an isolated pawn on d4. But there are some advantages over here by, like, this c1, c file, and e file being open, so this is still probably a good advantage. From here, what can you do is to keep this knight on d5 so that this pawn wouldn't advance, and also try to trade off a lot of pieces as you can, so that this pawn can be able to be weakened, because we're trying to go to an endgame. And instead of taking, knight to f3 is another good move. Now after e6, supports this pawn on d5. Let's say knight to f3, and we will just simply play bishop to b4 and just simply castle our king. If we place pawn to e3, just simply respond by playing bishop takes c3. See, But if he continues by playing bishop to d3, just castle. So now you know about the Caro Kann defense.